It was late summer of 2022 when I took a solo road trip through the vast, empty stretches of Wyoming. The idea had been simple: escape the city for a while, drive with no real destination, clear my head. I stuck to the highways at first, but as the sun started to dip below the horizon, I decided to take a more scenic route, a 2-lane back road that cut through endless plains and hills, where the only signs of life were the occasional farmhouse miles apart. The road stretched on forever, winding through empty land with no streetlights, no gas stations, just darkness swallowing the horizon. My phone had lost service miles ago, but I wasn't worried. My tank was full, and I had a GPS. But as the minutes ticked by, an unsettling feeling crept in. I hadn't seen another car in over an hour. Not a single one. The road ahead felt like it was stretching longer, as if I wasn't actually getting anywhere. The silence pressed in around me, thick and unnatural. Then I saw him, a figure standing in the middle of the road. I slammed the brakes, my heart lurching as my headlights flooded over him. A man, tall, thin, wearing a faded flannel and jeans. He wasn't waving for help, wasn't moving at all, just standing there, perfectly still, his face hidden beneath the shadow of his cap. The worst part? There was no car, no sign of how he got there, no reason for him to be standing on this desolate road at night. I sat frozen, gripping the wheel, my pulse thudding in my ears. Every instinct screamed at me to hit the gas, to get out of there, but I couldn't take my eyes off him. Then, without warning, he took a step forward. My breath caught in my throat. The way he moved, slow, deliberate, felt wrong. Not like someone approaching a car for help, but like someone who knew exactly what they were doing. My fingers tightened around the gear shift as he took another step. My headlights cast long shadows behind him, stretching unnaturally across the pavement. And then I noticed it. His shadow wasn't moving like it should. It stretched toward my car, too fast, too fluid, like it was reaching for me. I didn't think. I just hit the gas. Tires screeched as I swerved around him, my body shaking as I sped forward, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles went white. I checked the rearview mirror, expecting to see him still standing there. But he wasn't. He was closer. Right behind my car. I barely had time to register what I was seeing before the headlights flickered. A split second of darkness swallowed the road, and when the lights came back, he was gone. I drove faster than I ever had in my life, not daring to look in the mirror again. My hands trembled as I gripped the wheel, my chest tight with panic. The road stretched on, empty and endless, but I didn't feel alone. Something was still there, watching, following just beyond my sight. Then, up ahead, I saw it. A gas station. The first building I had seen in miles. I didn't hesitate. I swerved into the lot, tires screeching as I threw the car into park. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting a dull glow over the empty parking lot. My hands were shaking as I got out, needing to breathe, needing to convince myself that I was safe. The attendant inside looked at me strangely as I stumbled in, my face pale, my breaths uneven. I tried to act normal, to shake off the fear gripping my chest, but I had to ask. I described what I saw, the man in the road, the shadow that moved on its own. The attendant's face paled. He reached under the counter and pulled out an old, yellowed newspaper, unfolding it slowly before sliding it across to me. My stomach dropped. The front page headline read, "Local man killed in hit and run on back road. Driver never found." The photo beneath it was the same man I had seen standing in the road. The article was from 1998. I pushed the paper away, shaking my head. This had to be a joke, a coincidence. But the attendant just gave me a solemn look. Said others had seen him too. that those who stopped, they never made it out of the back roads. I didn't argue. I left the gas station, got back in my car, and took the longest, most crowded highway back to civilization. I still don't know what would have happened if I had stayed there longer, if I had let him take one more step toward my car. But sometimes, when I'm alone at night, driving down an empty road, I glance at the rearview mirror, and for a split second, I swear I see a figure standing there, waiting. It was in the dead of winter of 2023 when I took a wrong turn in the deep woods of northern Montana. I had been on a solo camping trip, looking for some peace and quiet, but I hadn't accounted for just how isolated the area would be. The further I drove, the thinner my cell signal became until it finally cut out entirely. The roads were empty, just endless miles of trees, snow-covered hills, and winding paths that all started to look the same. I wasn't worried at first. I had enough supplies, and I figured I could backtrack easily enough. But as the sun started sinking behind the mountains, I realized I had made a mistake. My GPS stopped working hours ago, and the road ahead twisted into unfamiliar territory. No signs, no markers, no tire tracks in the snow. Just untouched wilderness. My gas tank was dipping lower, and panic started creeping in. That's when I saw it. A small wooden cabin nestled in a clearing just off the road. It looked abandoned, the kind of place you'd expect hunters to use for shelter. But at that moment, I didn't care. I needed a place to stop, to figure out where the hell I was. I pulled up, leaving my engine running, and stepped out into the bitter cold. The cabin was old, the wood warped from years of exposure, the windows dark. Something about it felt wrong. The air was too still, too quiet. I knocked on the door, my breath curling in the freezing air, expecting no answer. But the moment my knuckles rapped against the wood, the door creaked open. I hesitated. It could have been the wind. Maybe the structure was just weak. But as I stepped inside, my boots crunching against the frost-covered floorboards, I knew something wasn't right. The cabin wasn't empty. There was a chair in the center of the room, positioned in front of a small, unlit fireplace, a table with plates still set, covered in dust, and on the far wall, a single framed photograph. I moved closer, my pulse quickening as I wiped away the layer of grime coating the glass. My stomach twisted. It was a photo of a man standing in front of this very cabin. The details were faded, but something about him made my skin crawl. He was too tall, his limbs too thin, and his face blurred, smudged out, as if someone had tried to erase his features. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I turned away, deciding then and there that I was leaving. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Not outside. Inside. Coming from the back room, every muscle in my body locked in place. I wasn't alone. The sound was slow, deliberate, like someone was waiting for me to notice. My breath hitched as I forced myself to move, stepping backward toward the door, my hands shaking. I barely made it to the threshold when I caught a glimpse of something in my peripheral vision. A figure, standing in the doorway of the back room, watching me. I didn't look directly at it. I couldn't. I just turned and ran, lunging into my car, throwing it into reverse, my tires kicking up snow as I sped away from that place as fast as I could. My heart pounded against my ribs, my hands trembling against the wheel. The trees blurred past me, my breath coming in quick, sharp bursts. But just as I thought I had put enough distance between me and that cabin, I glanced in my rearview mirror. The cabin was still there. Not behind me. Ahead. My stomach twisted violently. I slammed the brakes, my entire body trembling as I stared in disbelief. Somehow I had looped back around to it. The same clearing, the same warped wood, the same open door waiting for me. Then my headlights flickered, and in the space between the light and the dark, I saw something step out of the cabin. Tall, thin, waiting. I hit the gas. I didn't care where I ended up, didn't care if I wrecked my car as long as I got away. The road twisted violently beneath my tires, the wind howling around me as if something unseen was chasing me. But I didn't look back. I didn't stop. I don't know how long I drove, but eventually, I saw lights in the distance. A gas station. Civilization. I skidded into the lot, barely remembering to throw the car into park before stumbling inside. The clerk looked up at me, startled, as I gripped the counter, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I managed to ask where I was, barely able to get the words out. The clerk gave me an odd look, said there were no cabins out there, that the road I had taken hadn't been used in years. I left town the next morning, never looking back, but sometimes when I'm driving alone at night, I get this strange feeling, like I'm about to take a wrong turn, like if I go just a little too far off the main road, I'll end up back there, and next time, I might not make it out. It was late autumn of 2024 when I found myself stranded on an empty highway in rural Nebraska. I had been driving cross-country for work, making my way through stretches of farmland and endless sky, when my car started sputtering. The fuel gauge read half a tank, but the engine stuttered like it was running on fumes. I barely managed to pull over before it died completely. The road was empty. Not a single car had passed in over an hour. My phone had no signal, and the closest town was miles away. I popped the hood, even though I had no idea what I was looking for, but the engine was completely still. No steam, no leaks, nothing obviously wrong. That's when I noticed the scarecrow. It stood in the middle of a field just beyond the road, its form barely visible in the fading light. It was taller than any scarecrow I'd ever seen, with a tattered coat hanging off its frame, arms stretched wide like it was welcoming something. The weirdest part was its head. Too round, too smooth. No stitched burlap, no straw poking out. Just featureless and pale. A strange unease settled in my gut, and I forced myself to look away. I sat in my car, trying to figure out what to do when I heard it. A faint rustling from the field. At first, I thought it was the wind, but the air was completely still. I turned my head slowly, my breath catching in my throat. The scarecrow wasn't in the same spot. It had moved. It was closer. I blinked, my pulse hammering. Scarecrows didn't move. I told myself I must have misjudged the distance, that maybe the dim light was playing tricks on me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching. A flicker of motion in my peripheral vision. A woman now stood near the edge of the field, partially hidden behind the cornstalks. Her clothes were plain, a long dress swaying slightly, though there was still no breeze. Her face was wrong. Too smooth, too featureless. Just like the scarecrow's head. My body went rigid as she lifted her hand and beckoned. Every part of me screamed to stay put, to lock the doors, to pretend I hadn't seen her. But my body was tense, my muscles frozen in place, my brain fighting against some pull I didn't understand. The woman stepped forward, her movements unnatural, like she was learning how to walk. The sky darkened behind her, but the field seemed too bright, too sharp, too real. I forced myself to move, reaching for the keys even though I knew the car wouldn't start. My fingers fumbled, my breath coming in shallow gasps. When I looked back up, she was closer. Only a few feet from my door, her head tilted slightly, the motion jerky, inhuman. The smooth skin of her face rippled as if something was pressing against it from the inside, trying to push through. Then, She smiled. It wasn't natural. It wasn't human. The skin split at the corners of her mouth, stretching too far, the edges peeling like wet paper. My hands shook as I yanked at the door handle, but before I could open it, the woman spoke. A voice that didn't belong to her. A voice that sounded like mine. She said, "Let me in." I slammed my palm against the lock button and turned the key out of pure instinct. The engine roared to life. My tires screeched as I peeled away, gravel kicking up behind me. I didn't look back, not even once. I don't know how long I drove before I finally reached a gas station. I stumbled inside, breathless, my hands still shaking as I told the clerk my car had died back on the road. He gave me a strange look and asked which road I had been on. When I told him, his expression darkened. He said that road doesn't exist anymore, that it had been closed off years ago, that no one should have been out there. I didn't argue. I got back in my car and kept driving, never taking the back roads again. But sometimes, even now, when I'm alone at night, I hear it. A voice that sounds exactly like mine, whispering from the dark, "Let me in." If these stories made you think twice about lonely roads, like, share, and subscribe for more terrifying true horror stories. And don't forget to hit the bell icon, because sometimes, when you're all alone, something else is there too.